Have we ever pondered the difference between good literature and a textbook or an instruction manual? Now, I know we've all studied literature in our high school English classes, and maybe some of you intrepid souls have even studied some of that here at college. I took one class of literature when I was in college, and that was more than enough for me. I took even less math. But literature is easy for us to understand because unlike a textbook, for example, which proposes at the beginning of each chapter the lesson you're going to learn, the first sentence, the first paragraph, this is what we're going to cover in this chapter, and then the rest of the chapter unfolds and unpacks and explains the statements already made. So it's one particular tool for learning. But here's what literature does. Literature waits till the end to hit you with the point, the meaning, the theme, and the deep lesson of the text. And the way that the text unfolds through the development of plot, through the development of characters, through foreshadowing, and plenty of other literary devices, we slowly grow in insight and wisdom as the theme and the main message of the story is unfolded. You see the difference? One draws you in and helps you to grow as the text unfolds, and the textbook just gives you the information and then validates the point it already made. Nothing wrong with textbooks, but we should never read the Bible as if it is a textbook. Unfortunately, many Christians talk about it like it's a textbook. They'll cite a passage or quote a verse and treat it as if it was a reference manual. And sadly, that is doing it a disservice, because what it actually is beautiful literature. And the reason I share this with you is because I would suspect if you want to understand the depth and the complexity of our gospel passage today, which seems just kind of straightforward, right? Bartimaeus can't see. Jesus works a miracle for him. And all right, what's so complex about that? But if we were to read the Gospel of Mark as great literature, and by the way, it's so short that it's just over the typical length for a short story. That's how short the Gospel of Mark is. You could sit down and read it in one sitting. The Gospel of Mark is using this story as the last bookend of Jesus' miraculous work. It's the last miracle that Jesus works in the whole Gospel of Mark, the healing of the sight of blind Bartimaeus. And there's something unique here that we should notice right away, but if we look at it as a textbook, we won't. Do you ever realize that many of the people that Jesus worked miracles for, they don't have a name? 10 lepers, or a widow's son, or so on and so forth. We're just given descriptions for the people who receive miracles. But here in this passage, the man who was born blind and sight restored, we know his name, Bartimaeus. So the clue is given right up front. There's something special going on here. So let me demonstrate. Mark chapter 1. At the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, the very first miracle that he works, Jesus performs an exorcism, casting out a demon from a young man. And the text says this. This is Mark 1:21. Jesus and his disciples came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath entered the synagogue and taught. And just then there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And the man cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus, of Nazareth, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the demon cried. Now hear this. This next verse is the point. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, be silent and come out. Jesus' very first miracle was to confront the power of evil tormenting a man, and the demon knew who he was. And Jesus' response was to rebuke the demon and tell the demon to be silent. Now, that's the first miracle. Now let's go to the last miracle and recall what we just heard. When Jesus was going through Jericho, a blind man sat on the side of the road, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, remember, the demon shouted and said, I know who you are. Now Bartimaeus is shouting and saying, I know who you are. Jesus, you are the Son of David. Now pay attention, because I'm going to ask you the question. Who rebukes Bartimaeus? And the crowd around him rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he cried out even more loudly, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. And Jesus finally heard it, and Jesus called him. Now, do you see the comparing and contrasting? All throughout the gospel, Jesus is rebuking things. And so now we see that the crowd is rebuking Bartimaeus, but Jesus says, no, don't. Call him to me. Don't rebuke him. Over and over and over, this theme of rebuking what is wrong is used as a literary device for us to understand God's wisdom, God's confrontation of evil, and God's miraculous blessings on those who cry out to him. And what does Bartimaeus want? I want to see. And what does the crowd not understand? They, by rebuking him, they can't see. He's crying out, Son of David, but the crowd rebukes him because they can't see. For whatever reason, they're not able to see who he is. They're not able to see God's wisdom and God's desire to heal his sight. There's this comparing and contrasting of themes and of attitudes and of dispositions. And Mark is writing for us beautiful literature. And this is the final miracle of the Gospel of Mark. And here's what happens. I want to see, Bartimaeus says. And Jesus restores his sight. And then our sight is restored. Because now we see clearly. Now, the faith of Bartimaeus, who understands who Jesus truly is, Jesus, the Son of David, Jesus, the Messiah, Jesus, the Savior of the world. Up until this point, the only people who knew who Jesus was, that's the amazing thing about the Gospel of Mark. When he does his literature, the only people who know who Jesus is, not even the apostles, the only people who know who Jesus is in the Gospel of Mark are the demons. They're the only one who know. Until Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus knows. Bartimaeus believes he is the Messiah. He is the Son of David. He is the Savior of the world. And now, by us observing this miracle from a distance through great literature, we see the response of faith. When Bartimaeus' faith is verified through Jesus' miracle of healing him, Bartimaeus casts aside his cloak and follows Jesus. He follows Jesus along the way. He does not go back home to his father Timaeus. He does not pick up his collections and his begging money from the day he'd been begging all day. He doesn't take that. He casts everything aside and he follows Jesus. And the rest of the story is clear. Leaving Jericho, Jesus goes straight to Jerusalem, and within a few days suffers and dies on the cross. Bartimaeus was with him the whole time. Now, having received his sight, Bartimaeus understands who Jesus is and the response of discipleship. And by us reading such a beautiful literary story, we are challenged to do the same thing.